And we had lots of surprises.
Yes, indeed, and started the season off with new rule changes trying to slow these cars down. But we ended up with lots of first-time winners, lots of new faces on the podium, like Eddie Irvine, Gianni Morbidelli in Australia. But the first-time winners were great to see. David Coulthard in the Williams became a winner. Johnny Herbert won twice, and then John Alesi had a great day in Canada. But you know, for me, one of the star names only appeared one time this year when he filled in for Mika Hakkinen, who had an appendicitis. That was Jan Magnussen in the McLaren. To my mind, was just spectacular.
There is lots to talk about in 1995. In the next 60 minutes, we'll touch on all of it. But first, let's go to Estoril, Portugal, where our pit commentator, James Allen, is standing by, keeping tabs on off-season testing. James?
Thank you, guys. Yes, I'm here at Estoril for the last major Formula One test before Christmas. A lot of familiar faces and unfamiliar cars here. Michael Schumacher, the reigning world champion, and Eddie Irvine, and now Ferrari drivers, of course. Gerhard Berger and Jean Alesi have switched to Benetton, and the reigning IndyCar champion, Jacques Villeneuve, is learning all about the Williams. It looks as though the 1996 Formula One season is going to be the most competitive for many years. And later on in the show, we'll talk to the drivers, who work just as hard in the winter as they do during the racing season. But for now, let's look back over 1995. Back to you guys.
All right, thank you, James. We'll look forward to that. Eric, the theme at the beginning of the year was, let's make racing safer. A lot of racetracks got reprofiled at great expense, which led to us having 17 races instead of 16. And there were good and bad parts of that. We got the classic quarter at Eau Rouge back, and we also saw the institution of a lot of Mickey Mouse chicanes. Imola is one racetrack that comes to mind. But they worked even harder on the race cars.
They did, and we started this season with lots of rule changes, the two big ones being with the engines and the downforce. The engines were downsized from 3.5 litre down to 3 litre. That robbed the cars of about 100 horsepower.
And it changed the balance of power, so to speak, in a way. McLaren Mercedes, the only team to come with an all-new 3-liter engine at the beginning of the season, and they struggled all year long with it. But we had a lot of aerodynamic reprofiling as well.
And I think this is where the real big field difference came in these cars. And actually, I was fortunate enough to go to the site of the French Grand Prix at Magny-Cours and test drive the Ligier Formula One car. And believe me, with 40% less downforce, which is what they have this year, these cars are much, much more unstable. Now, there were lots of different ways teams tried to get that downforce back. The mid-wing in the McLaren was one idea. But boy, we sure had some ugly Formula One cars this year.
But we sure had some great races as well. And in just a moment, we'll begin our highlights of the 1995 season. We'll journey to South America for Brazil and Argentina. Stay with us for more of the 1995 Formula One Year in Review. Welcome back to our look back at the 1995 Formula One World Championship. I'm Bob Barsha, along with Derek Daly. And Derek, no one would disagree that 1995 was the season that belonged to Michael Schumacher. But then the arguing starts about drivers relative to one another. Give me your top 5 drivers of the season.
And this was an interesting challenge for this show, but see what you think of this. Number 1, of course, has to be Michael Schumacher. He is all things to everybody, a very special talent who seemed to be able to drive a very nervous car way quicker than anybody else. He has to be the undisputed number 1. Now, number 2, another German, Heinz-Harald Frentzen. Now, it may be difficult to have an accurate assessment of what he's like against the true world championship material, but all I know is he seems to behave himself on the racetrack, isn't a crasher, and has been considerably faster than everybody he's been up against directly. Move to number 3, up to DC, David Coulthard. You have to remember, this man was so inexperienced when he came into this season, yet in Argentina he was on the pole. Then he got lost a little bit, had some physical difficulties with tonsillitis, but when he was under pressure and he lost his drive, he was spectacular, faster than ever. And I think that's a true measure of mental toughness, which is a great thing in a driver. Number 4, I put his teammate, Damon Hill. He took the fight to Schumacher so often, but Damon Hill went off the boil halfway through the season. And I don't think he picked up that team and led it the way he needs to if he is to be a realistic World Championship contender next season. And number 5, and this may be a surprise, I put Jan Magnussen, because what I saw in Aida was a talent that showed an unusual maturity for a man who just got thrown into that car literally 5 or 6 days before. So I truly believe that Ron Dennis has a jewel in that young man from Denmark, and we will hear a lot more about him in the years to come.
I agree with you there. Now, of course, at the beginning of the season, no one knew what drivers would do relative to one another. That's, as they say, why they run the races. And it all began in Sao Paulo, Brazil, back in March. The season opener in Sao Paulo featured the colors of the late Ayrton Senna on Rubens Barrichello's helmet. Damon Hill took pole while Mark Blundell filled in for Nigel Mansell. Hill led until a broken gearbox sent the Williams spinning. Mika Salo looped his Tyrrell out of third when his arm cramped, while Taki Inoue went up in smoke. David Coulthard drove well, but there was no catching the world champion. After the race, both Michael Schumacher and Coulthard were disqualified for illegal fuel, boosting Gerhard Berger to the win until officials reversed themselves 2 weeks later. Coulthard took his first pole in Argentina, but it went for naught when Jean Alesi's Ferrari collected a handful of cars at the first corner, bringing out a red flag. Chaos reigned everywhere on the damp, narrow track. Everyone ran for spare cars and tried again. This time, Mika Hakkinen shredded a tire on Eddie Irvine's Jordan, but the race went on. Coulthard led until his engine died. Hill then drew away from Schumacher for his first win of the season, the 10th of his Grand Prix career, a wild start to a long season. And so the first two races of the year had a little bit of everything. Close shaves for Michael Schumacher and David Coulthard. Bitter disappointment for Damon Hill and Gerhard Berger. Confusion over the rules, hefty fines, and some first corner collisions that would be a theme in 1995. Race 3 of the series took the teams and drivers back to continental Europe, to the Autodromo Ferrari in Imola, Italy, site of the tragedies of 1994. The anniversary of the deaths of Roland Ratzenberger and Ayrton Senna at the San Marino Grand Prix was marked with ceremony. And though the Imola track had been modified to slow the cars, new pavement and wet weather combined to produce crashes. None more surprising than Michael Schumacher's too much speed on cold tires. Gerhard Berger led, then stalled in the pits. Jean Alesi banged wheels with David Coulthard, and angry words followed. McLaren struggled to refuel their cars, while Nigel Mansell suffered at the hands of Eddie Irvine on his return to racing. Damon Hill won, opening his championship lead to 6 points. Schumacher came back to take pole in Barcelona, where the sun always shines, but the green light didn't. John Alesi's luck ran out with the oil in his Ferrari. By then, Mansell had spun his McLaren and retired from what would be his last race. Johnny Herbert took fuel, tires, and the rear jack on a pit stop, then finished second behind Schumacher, a second that belonged to Hill until the gearbox broke. There was no sympathy on the podium. Welcome to Monaco, darling, where Damon Hill took the pole, but the turn at Saint-Devote was just full of red hankies. John Alesi and Gerhard Berger were kind enough to invite David Coulthard to a Ferrari team meeting, after which everyone walked back to talk things over and change their dinner reservations. Jean Alesi and Martin Brundle had a little coming together that erased the Ferrari from second place, after which the Frenchman was just furious. That nice Mr. Schumacher lives here, so he knows his way around and won his second straight Monaco victory, the first for that Renault engine thingy. In Canada, Mika Hakkinen and Johnny Herbert continued the practice of pushing and shoving on the first lap, while David Coulthard slipped on a wet patch and threw himself out of the race. Again, it was Alesi on the charge, passing Hill for second. Hill's blood pressure wasn't helped when the gearbox later broke. A battle for fifth between Martin Brundle and Gerhard Berger ended in a collision, but the day belonged to Alesi, scoring an emotional first victory in the 27 Ferrari, forever tied to the memory of Canadian Gilles Villeneuve. One of the great moments of the year in Canada. But let's talk a little bit about one of the non-stories of 1995, Derek. Nigel Mansell at McLaren.
Signed to lead the team to great fanfare over the winter time. He was too big to even fit in the car, missed 2 races. Then he parked a healthy racing car in Barcelona. That was the beginning of the downfall. They mutually agreed to part ways after that. It was an embarrassment and a flop. Now, James Allen may have more insight into Nigel Mansell because he actually co-wrote Mansell's autobiography, which incidentally has been on the bestseller list since it appeared on the streets. James?
Well, I'm delighted to say the book is actually currently number 2 in the UK bestseller list, having sold almost 150,000 copies. In it, Nigel says that he was surprised when he joined McLaren to find that Ron Dennis had actually taken his eye off the ball, perhaps, of the Formula One team, having got himself involved in many other business ventures, like, for example, the McLaren Super Road car. He'd left the running of the team to other people, and it was really only at the beginning of the 1995 season that he realised how big a problem he'd got. Nigel was obviously disappointed with the car that he found at McLaren. He tried to do something with it. The team says he didn't do enough, and in the end, he took the decision to stand down. Well, I asked his teammate, Mika Hakkinen, whether he was surprised by Nigel's decision.
Yeah, I mean, I was, because if you make a commitment the race, then you do it from start to finish and you don't give up. But I guess when you're world champion and the things doesn't go like you want, and when you are qualifying to something like 12th or 13th, I guess it makes you think what I'm doing here, and makes you feel I want to go back and not to do that.
I'm sure he felt he could win, and he has the potential to win. Unfortunately, the package around him wasn't good enough to win, and we can still see that. But, at the same time, he wasn't prepared to tolerate these problems, and that's expected as well. He's achieved a great deal.
Well, you can be sure the Mansell situation will be a case study in public relations textbooks for years to come. Now, as we just saw, the Williams team was in complete disarray in Canada. Could they get their act together as the teams headed back to Europe for the long summer ahead? We'll find out when we return. Welcome back to our review of the 1995 Formula One season. Derek, we watched John Alesi's emotional victory in Canada a moment ago, and that sort of embodies the resurgence of the sport's greatest name, Ferrari, in 1995.
That's right, and let's not pretend anything here. He didn't win with speed, he won with reliability. Well, who cares? He won the race. But I think what was more significant about this weekend was that back at Maranello, the V10 engine that may be the cornerstone of Ferrari's future success had already run on the dyno.
And we knew at this time that Ferrari was also courting the defending world champion, Michael Schumacher, for a phenomenal amount of money. It turned out to be $25 million a season. Make no mistake, Ferrari meant business in 1995. For more now, let's go back to Estoril, Portugal, and James Allen.
Well, yes, Jean Alesi spent 5 years at Ferrari, of course, culminating in that emotional win at Canada. Jean, you must be sad in a way to have left Ferrari, but also happy to have taken the win with you.
Actually, 5 years with Ferrari was fantastic for me because it's a very good experience. But now I joined the team who is world champion, and that is very exciting for me because I know I will do and I will be able to do very good results.
Well, Ferrari became a lot more competitive in 1995. Do you think the results you achieved reflect that?
Now is finished with them. I'm sure they improve a lot the team. They improve the chassis too, and let's say they improved, but it's not what they wanted to have, because just one victory for Ferrari is not enough.
All right, thank you, James. Derek, now let's go from the front of the pack to the back. The Minardis, the Pacifics, and the Simtex, who closed up shop after Monaco and had their assets auctioned off for $250,000. That is chump change in Formula One, but it's always been tough back there.
And things are not going to get any easier, because if you consider this year, Pacific, they spent a mere $7 million just to start at the back of the grid. And no matter what speed they did, they got to start. There was only 24 cars. But things are different for next year, because now a new 107% rule has been instigated. Now, what does this mean? Well, if the pole sitter does a lap time of, let's say, 1 minute, 60 seconds, 1% of that is 0.6 of a second. Multiply that by 7, that's 4.2 seconds. Now, the pole man does a minute. The last man on the grid has to do a minimum speed of 1 minute, 4.2 seconds to get the privilege of starting. It's much more difficult now. I think that's a tall order.
No question about it. And with next year's new qualifying rules allowing just one session on Saturday afternoon, it may take out some of the front runners as well. Well, now let's resume our look at the highlights of 1995, beginning at Manicourt in France and the start of a soul-searching journey for Damon Hill.
No sooner did the series arrive in France than Mika Hakkinen arrived in a gravel trap. While the fans tried to wave, the best in the world tried to stay out of trouble. Jean Alesi tagged Johnny Herbert, who was fined for not serving a penalty for jumping the start. Rubens Barrichello and Olivier Panis also jumped, then broke new ground by serving their penalties together. Hill and Schumacher raced nose to tail, which led to an argument over whose driving was the more dangerous. Eddie Irvine's elation over his third in Canada turned to pain when he stalled in the pits. On track, Gerhard Berger and Mark Blundell had a great dice for eighth that lasted all the way to the flag. Meanwhile, Alesi added to his list of opponents hit by tagging Luca Badouar's Minardi. Schumacher and Hill weren't speaking because the German had the points lead. At Silverstone, Hill delighted the home fans by edging Schumacher for the pole and needling the German in the newspapers. Barrichello jumped the start, Berger lost a wheel, and Mika Hakkinen switched off, the latter two dropping from the points. The key moment came when Hill tried to dive inside Schumacher and took both title contenders out of the race. Hill called it a mistake of aggression. Schu preferred the word lunacy. A similar lack of agreement marked the last lap collision between Barrichello and Mark Blundell, dicing for fourth. The surprise win went to Johnny Herbert, aided by a stop-and-go levied against David Coulthard in the midst of their fight. Another happy first-time winner, another steamed world champion.
It was completely unnecessary, in my view, what Damon had done there. There was no room for him to go there. He came from nowhere, as I got told from my engineers, and I don't see the sense of doing things like this, even in front of your home crowd.
At Hockenheim, Hill took pole and joked with the German fans after a qualifying spin. There was no laughter, however, when Hill spun again, this time on lap 2 of the race while leading. More problems for Jean Alesi, whose day ended early again. The McLaren team embarrassed itself with not one blown engine, but 2. For Schumacher, there were no dramas at all, and while others hitched rides home, he climbed the podium for his 15th victory, breaking a tie with Graham Hill, Emerson Fittipaldi, and Jack Brabham for 10th on the all-time list.
What a day for Michael Schumacher at the Hockenheim ring, becoming the first German since Rudolf Caracciola back in 1939 to win his home Grand Prix. But as good a day as it was for Schumacher, Derek, it was a bloody day for McLaren. Neither car finished.
And this downward spiral that we see McLaren in just seems to get worse. Have a look at this panel here. Look at 1989, where they won 15 of 16 races. And look at that free fall downward to the bottom for the last 2 seasons when they have gone winless yet again. Now, McLaren could not fix this problem from within, so they went to Alain Prost, hoping that he could come in and be some sort of lifeline.
And, of course, the rumors flew that Mercedes and Marlboro will not wait long for McLaren to achieve success once again. Thanks, Derek. We'll be back to our review of the 95 season in a moment, but 95 also included tragedy for the Formula One World Championship with the passing of one of its greatest legends, 5-time world champion Juan Manuel Fangio. Here is a look at the maestro who will never be replaced. Welcome back to our review of the 1995 Formula One World Driving Championship. I'm Bob Varsha. As the second half of the season began, it was clear it would be another year of Michael Schumacher against Damon Hill. And as the teams journeyed to the Hungaroring in Budapest, Hungary, it began a trio of races with lots of surprises and some spectacular driving.
The annual visit to the Hungaroring was dampened early on by a crash that sent Jean Alesi to the hospital for observation. For Schumacher, it marked his first race as a married man. It was even more unusual for Taki Inoue, who was bruised when he was hit by a safety car while trying to put out the fire in his footwork. The tight Hungaroring claimed its share of vehicles, including Mika Salo's Tyrrell. Schumacher got close to his rival, but then the engine died. Advantage Damon Hill. The Belgian Grand Prix featured an all-Ferrari front row. Mika Hakkinen spun on lap 2. While Jean Alesi and Johnny Herbert battled for the lead until the Frenchman retired with a broken suspension. In the slippery conditions, title rivals Hill and Schumacher rushed from 8th and 16th to the front, where they began a furious game of wet pavement chicken as the rain began to fall. In the midst of the fun, Eddie Irvine suffered a blazing pit fire, and the confusion overflowed onto the track when the safety car appeared. This baffled Yukio Katayama, who spun during the caution period. Damon Hill stopped 5 times for tires, spun, and served the stop-and-go penalty for speeding in the pits. Nevertheless, he managed to squeeze his way back to second by the end of the race, minimizing the damage inflicted by his rival. For Schumacher, the victory was his 6th of the year, the 16th of his career, tying him with Sterling Moss for 9th place among the Immortals and opening a 15-point gap on Hill for the championship. Monza marked the final appearance for the Ferrari drivers in front of their fans and a new deal at Sauber for Heinz-Harald Frentzen. David Coulthard took the pole, then tried to throw it away by sliding off on the warm-up lap. Luckily for DC, a first-lap tango between Olivier Panis and Max Papis brought out the red flag, allowing Coulthard and others to climb aboard their backups for the restart. Ironically, Coulthard then spun off at exactly the same spot later in the race. A few laps later, Damon Hill dodged a back marker and slid into Schumacher while running second and third, taking both out in a replay of Silverstone. John Alesi's onboard camera flew off, breaking the suspension of his teammate's car behind. Once again, both Jordan drivers walked home, as did Alesi after leading. On hand to grab the win was the opportunistic Johnny Herbert, bumped from his Benetton seat by Berger and Alesi, but winner of two of the biggest races of the year.
Hard to believe that Johnny Herbert won the two biggest races of the year at Silverstone and Monza and is without a drive as we speak, looking ahead to 1996. But let's talk about the collisions between Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher. We got a belly full of it last year.
And it was great racing this year. But you know the problem? The winding meter was pegged for most of the season because Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill complained so much about each other. Let's take a couple of incidents. The French Grand Prix. Schumacher blamed Damon Hill for short braking him at the last corner. Hill was only trying to lap a back marker, the 40 car driven by Moreno. Then we had that tremendous tussle in the damp conditions in Spa, and Damon Hill complained that Michael Schumacher made it too difficult for him. I mean, come on. What happened to good old-fashioned wheel-to-wheel tough racing? Isn't that what Formula One is supposed to be?
I suppose maybe the media has its own role to play in firing up the relationship between the two title protagonists, but it got so bad at one point they threatened to institute new rules, telling drivers at the highest level of motorsport how to pass. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed. We're going to take a step away for a moment before returning to our review of the 1995 season. We'll check in with James Allen in Estoril, Portugal. So stay with us.
My manager talked me into this whole Ferrari deal. Let's see, 20% of $48 million is $9 million commission. Ach du Lieber, that's why he did it.
And Norbert, I'll drive the Mercedes for half that much. I can't believe I'm getting a quarter of what Michael does, and he still won't smile.
Of course I know who I'm driving for next year, you idiot. Maybe I don't.
No kidding, Flavio. I do look good in blue.
Michael, what do you think about this Indy Lights series in America?
Was the last time? Michael is not taking my seat. I am taking his.
Gary, I'd love to stay, but Eddie Jordan's too cheap. A Bring Back Mansell campaign, yeah?
I want somebody please buy me out.
Mark, can I have the old uniform?
I never said I would not test. So what you think about Mansell? 43 is not old.
Hey, Yoss, in America, a watch means you've retired, mate. You're kidding me. How many laps do I get to qualify?
I love this job. Mwah, mwah.
Frank, I'm serious. Mansell's on the phone.
I get this plate. He gets the bank.
Huh. Flavio thinks he knows real talent.
What? There's someone over here I can talk to? See you.
Welcome back to our look back at the 1995 Formula One World Driving Championship. I'm Bob Barcia with Derek Daly. Derek, the silly season is a part of every form of motorsport, but it's gotten so rabid in Formula One in recent years that rules had to be instituted declaring the number of changes you could make to your team, and a lot of teams were right on the limit.
They were, and of course, the teams continue to try and find that magic chemistry between the driver, the engineers, and the team that will actually give them that extra piece of speed. But also, commercialism dictates a lot of where these drivers move.
Those dollars are very important to teams when you're spending millions of bucks trying to be competitive. Of course, the biggest driver change of the year was Michael Schumacher from Benetton to Ferrari for about $25 million. That was followed shortly after by the news that Eddie Irvine would leave Jordan to become Michael's number 2 at Ferrari. A huge surprise. How will Eddie fare against a man who was known to eat his teammates alive? We asked Eddie's teammate from the year past, Rubens Barrichello.
Well, Eddie is a very brave person. He's very nice and he's quick. That's for sure. So it's gonna be a stone inside Michael Schumacher tennis. So it's gonna be a problem for him. But you know, it's as long as Michael understands what Eddie means. You know, because he's different. You know, he's a nice person, but he's different. You have to understand how is Eddie Irvine.
Those are the thoughts of Rubens Barrichello. On another subject, Barrichello, one of the many drivers victimized by perhaps the newest technology in Formula One, the jump start sensors.
The jump start sensor, the dreaded jump start. Now, what happened? It was instigated in Monaco, and at that race, no fewer than 6 drivers jumped the start. Here's what happened. They have an electronic sensor in the car and in the racetrack. On your starting grid position, as soon as you come to a standstill, everything resets. Now, at any time, if you roll, now remember those downhill starts in Brazil and in Belgium, at any time, if you roll a fraction of an inch, you've already been judged to jump the start, even though the green light's nowhere near in sight.
And that's letting technology get ahead of judgment, I think. If someone jumps a start or is a few miles an hour over the pit lane speed limit, fine him, bring him in or whatever, but that assumes he's not in the middle of a battle for a possible victory, as David Coulthard was racing with Johnny Herbert in Silverstone. We won't even get into the subject of suspended suspensions, but we should talk a little bit, I think, about the levels of fines levied in 1995.
The old checkbook of the FIA got well padded this year with fines from drivers for all sorts of things. But one of the more unusual fines happened to Jean Alesi. Because he said something derogatory about his team manager, Jean Todt, they fined him $200,000. Now, you think that's unusual? Well, consider in 1991, when they had Alan Prost, one of the finest racing drivers ever to step into a Ferrari, he said that his car handled like a truck. They didn't fine him, they fired him.
Fact of life at Ferrari. Now let's get back to the highlights of 1995, beginning in Estoril, Portugal, a race that began with the crash of the year.
The weekend began with assurances from Eddie Jordan that he had signed up his drivers for 96. At the start of the race, Ukio Katayama collided with the encroaching Luca Badua and flew into a series of vicious rolls. Despite the severity of the crash, Katayama emerged with little more than bruising and a sore neck. During the melee, Heinz-Harald took to the gravel and was forced to the back of the pack for the restart. At the green, Mika Hakkinen charged through the field on the track where he once out-qualified Ayrton Senna. But even Hakkinen's drive was outshone by Frentzen, who rocketed back through the field to finish sixth. David Coulthard moved to the front after the last round of pit stops and gamely held on while teammate Hill was attacked and passed by Schumacher for second. In the end, DC became the third first-time winner of the 95 season, giving the Williams team cause to wonder whether they had erred in allowing the Scot to go to McLaren for 96. Bad October weather is common in Germany's Eifel Mountains, as we learned at the Nürburgring. David Coulthard made his contract official with McLaren, as did Eddie Irvine with Ferrari and Martin Brundle with Jordan. Gerhard Berger sported a peaceful new helmet for the weekend. Coulthard continued his good qualifying with another pole, his mystifying mistakes with another spin-off, and his superior luck when a stall on the grid allowed him to remount. When the race began, the increasingly desperate Damon Hill attacked in damp conditions, first passing Eddie Irvine, then getting around Gerhard Berger. The dicing continued as Schumacher nailed Hill in treacherous conditions under braking for the chicane. Then the points leader, driving in yet another home Grand Prix, passed Coulthard for the lead. Meanwhile, Damon Hill's attempt to go three wide and pass Alesi misfired badly, damaging the front wheel on the Williams. Things were worse in the Pacific pits, where Andrea Montermini accidentally ran over crewman Paul Summerfield, breaking Summerfield's leg. Eddie Irvine lost the battle for traction in the chicane, costing the Irishman a finish. Hill suffered the same fate, but it cost the Englishman a championship. Schumacher won a close-fought battle with the Ferrari of Jean Alesi on this tight pass in the chicane. The German's brilliant drive rewarded with his seventh win, a fact graciously acknowledged by Hill. Schumacher was his old self on the podium, delighted in victory, secure in the knowledge that his second title was all but won.
With that spectacular performance at the Nürburgring, Michael Schumacher essentially sewed up the 1995 Formula One World Drivers' Championship. He needed only a couple of points from the final three races in Japan and Australia to sew up his title, and he got all the ones he needed in the very next race.
The first of the Pacific Rim events was the Pacific Grand Prix at Aida, Japan, where David Coulthard took pole in the early lead, while Michael Schumacher was pushed to the edge of the track by Damon Hill, who was fighting to keep his meager championship flame lit. While Hill and Schumacher fought their individual war, Coulthard and the Ferraris began to draw away. Rubens Barrichello found a driving match of his own in McLaren new boy Jan Magnussen, who subbed for the ailing Mika Hakkinen and drove superbly. Chasing Alesi's Ferrari, Hill found himself too close to Eddie Irvine with the usual results. When Coulthard pitted, Schumacher moved to the lead, and as was the case much of the year, the combination of Benetton's strategy and the skills of Michael Schumacher were enough to win. With the checkered flag, Schumacher joined the list of Grand Prix stars as the youngest back-to-back champion ever. But for Michael and team boss Flavio Briatore, there was business to attend to. A week later, in the Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka, Schumacher set on pole for the first time since Canada in June, the object to clinch the Constructors' title for Benetton. The star of the early wet running was Rainmeister Jean Alesi, who was handed a jump start stop and go. Go he did, using all of the track and then some in his efforts to score points, eventually catching and passing Damon Hill for second. Others struggled in the conditions. Returning to the scene of his Formula One debut, Eddie Irvine collided with his teammate and then with Heinz-Harald here. Alesi's charge brought him all the way to second before luck and his Ferrari died together. Late in the race, the spoon curve began a collection of Williams cars, including both Damon Hill and David Coulthard. For Coulthard, his fresh load of gravel proved his undoing en route to the pits. And in a final comic irony, it also claimed Damon Hill, sweeping Williams to its most embarrassing low of the season. No such problems for Schumacher, whose ninth win tied Nigel Mansell's record for victories in a season and locked up Benetton's first Constructors' crown as a going-away present. The season finale on the streets of Adelaide, Australia provided its own set of surprises. David Coulthard's pole became a race lead, which became a DNF when he hit the pit wall on his first stop. Johnny Herbert and Heinz-Harald played tit-for-tat passing at the end of Brabham Straight, while Jordan teammates Barrichello and Irvine both retired again. Schumacher's record 10th win became moot after this tangle with Jean Alesi's Ferrari. The pictures tell it all. After shedding parts, both cars retired. Johnny Herbert nearly repeated Coulthard's mistake at the pit entrance while running second. Frentzen struggled past Mark Blundell, only to lose his engine a few laps later. Moments before Herbert's last race for Benetton ended with a sheared drive shaft. Stroke forward from Olivier Panis Léger, but he managed to hold on for second. For Hill, it was too easy. Pole, fast lap, and victory at the end of a long season.
And so the glorious history of Formula One on the streets of Adelaide, Australia came to a conclusion, which was sad for everyone involved, but it was almost the scene of a tragic accident in qualifying.
And it was a mechanical failure that befell Mika Häkkinen in the McLaren. Punctured left rear tire, and you can watch as he flies off the racetrack backwards, and watch as this super slow-mo shows you the violence at the point of impact, and Mika Häkkinen's head goes backwards and forwards like a rag doll. I just wish there was more energy absorption material in the cockpit and against the concrete wall.
And I guess the ironic thing is there will be in Formula One as plans presently dictate, including the possibility of airbags in Formula One cars. Well, at the moment, Mika Häkkinen is back in Europe, walking around and planning to be in the car when the series returns to Melbourne, Australia, to open the 1996 season. But the reality of head injuries is that is a wish and not a plan. We'll be back with more of the 1995 season in just a moment.
Welcome back. Well, the 1995 season was one of the toughest on record, with 17 Grand Prix as opposed to the usual 16. As Michael Schumacher proved with his 9 wins, consistency, as always, was the key. We caught up with some of the drivers and asked them how many points out of 10 they give themselves for their season.
Well, you are a bad sportsman if you don't give your 10, isn't it?
Not a lot.
10. I mean, because I've had such a hard job this year. I've stepped in to replace Mansell. I've missed 2 races and I've scored 10 points. The other guy in the car's done 2 more races and scored only 11.
Out of 10, 9. Did a good job this year, especially from a part-time position. Joined the party very late, having waited for McLaren because I didn't think Mansell would drive the McLaren. I turned out to be wrong, but not for very long.
I would love to give myself 10 out of 10, but unfortunately, because I had a bad mid-season, then 7.
Well, it's always difficult to give a number for yourself how good you are, but of course I give myself 10.
I wonder if you meant 10 points or $10 million.
Be your own best cheerleader.
No question about it. We are. Now let's talk about some of the drivers who came into the season with points to make, which is virtually everyone in the field, but some made their points better than others.
I think Heinz-Harald Frentzen made his point, definitely. He's fast, reliable, doesn't crash. I think you have to look at Eddie Irvine, who made himself into a multi-million-dollar man by consistently being faster than his teammate Barrichello. David Coulthard made his point. Remember we spoke to him in Estoril? He said, I really want to go away from Williams as a winner. Well, he did. Then there's Johnny Herbert. Did he make his point? You would think a double Grand Prix winner did. Yes, at the end of the year he leaves, still not commanding the respect that you think a 2-time Grand Prix winner should really have.
And of course, the man who made the biggest point of all was Michael Schumacher, who will make $25 million next year. Now, as Derek mentioned, we spoke with David Coulthard at Portugal, and shortly after, he went out and picked up that first victory. We asked him what he thinks it might mean to his career.
Well, by the time I finally crossed the line in Portugal, it was relief more than anything else because it took so long to actually get that win. But haven't had time to think about it. Of course, extremely happy that I was able to win in Formula One and to do it against all the main competitors. And yeah, it's something that can't be taken away. And of course, it's something that I intend to make happen again.
Well, David Coulthard's career is looking bright and shiny as he moves to the McLaren Mercedes team next year. But there were a lot of drivers without rides in 1996. Here's a look at the list that was submitted as required at the end of the 95 season. And note that many teams who used to enter drivers first are now entering just the teams, and there are a lot of TBA slots to be filled. Two prominent names you do not see there are Mark Blundell, who has done yeoman service for McLaren in relief of Nigel Mansell this year, and Johnny Herbert, who, as we mentioned, won 2 Grands Prix but remains rideless in 1996. It's interesting to note that Blundell, Herbert, and several other Formula One drivers are talking actively about Indy cars, in fact have tested Indy cars in anticipation of 1996. We'll be back to our Formula One year in review and join James Allen in Estoril, Portugal again in just a moment.
Welcome back. Well, all the top teams are here at Estoril testing Williams, Benetton and Ferrari. And it's the first chance for their new drivers to measure themselves up against each other. But of course, all eyes are on Michael Schumacher in the Ferrari. Michael, have you had a chance yet to weigh up the magnitude of what you've achieved in the last 2 years?
I haven't had much time, to be honest, because I was straight away in the new car. So there was no time of celebrating and looking back what has happened in the past. I was concentrating very early to look forward to the new challenge which I'm going to have together with Ferrari, which is looking promising, but it will be the case that it will take a while until we're ready to go for the championship, and in my view that's not going to be 96.
What was the high point of the 95 season for you? Was it that win in Nürburgring?
Yes, I mean there were many actually. There was Hockenheim, Nürburgring, as well as Spa and Monte Carlo, but the highest two was actually Hockenheim and Nürburgring. The first time I was able to win a German Grand Prix and win the second as well in a way which I was surprised myself.
Now you're running at the moment with the V10 engine. How does that compare to the Renault you've been used to?
It's basically not far off. I mean, if you talk of the principle of the engine, it feels pretty similar. It is a bit down in power, but that's what you have to expect. But we know Ferrari is very good in achieving power and developing engines, so we have to look into this. Or let's say I'm not worried about this. The only worry you could have is reliability, what we have to be concerned on.
Good luck in 96.
Thank you.
Michael Schumacher has been working on the new V10 engine, already close to the power output of 1995's V12. The reliability of this engine in 1996 will hold the key to Schumacher's chances of winning the title for Ferrari in his first year. The new car, designed by John Barnard, should make its debut at the end of January. Well, joining Michael Schumacher in the Ferrari team in one of the most popular and unexpected moves made in 1995 is Eddie Irvine. Eddie, how are you settling in at Ferrari?
Yes, it's great. You know, you get out of the car and there's 5 engineers there wanting to know what's going on and trying to help you go faster, you know, so it gives you a lot of confidence.
A lot of the magic you're finding attached to the Ferrari name?
Not the magic, it's, you know, there's a lot of good people here, there's a lot of depth in the technical side, and that's very important because Formula One now is just pure technology.
We'll be back to our Formula One year in review and join James Allen in Estoril, Portugal again in just a moment.
Welcome back to Estoril. Well, runner-up in the World Championship for the second year in succession, Damon Hill. Damon, did you learn any lessons in 1995 which you think might help you to win it in 96?
I think that I could look back over last season and say I did it wrong in a few places and try not to do that again next year. I think that I'm constantly looking to improve, and yes, I think I could use the experience from last year to make myself a stronger competitor for 96.
Williams has been putting Jacques Villeneuve through a tough test program to learn the Formula One circuits and his new car. So far, he's done over 1,500 miles of testing. The team has been very impressed with his pace. He would have been on the front row for the Grand Prix on all the circuits he's tested on so far. Well, there's no doubt that IndyCar fans will be watching Formula One in 1996 because the reigning champion, Jacques Villeneuve, is going to be taking on the Formula One big boys. Jacques, you've seen some of the mistakes that Michael Andretti made when he came over to Formula One. What steps are you taking to make sure that doesn't happen to you?
Well, first of all, I'm getting loads of miles, which Michael didn't get. They didn't get the car soon enough, and he didn't do much mileage before the start of the season, so that can never be a help. Where we're doing tons of them, and so we should be prepared for the first race.
Now, you're running real competitive times so far in testing. Are you happy you'll be straight on the pace at the beginning of the season?
Well, I'm happy that the times have been quick, but testing and a race weekend are two different things, so we'll really have to wait until the start of the season. But yeah, so far it's been going well. We're learning how to work with each other in the team, and that's really important.
Gerhard Berger has so far proved too tall for the Benetton. But with a virtual reality model back at the Benetton headquarters, they hope they should be able to accommodate him in the 1996 car. It's an intensive program for Benetton. Last year they only had one test car with Michael Schumacher. Now they're running two for Berger and Jean Alesi. Alesi says he can't understand why Schumacher said the Benetton was a nervous car.
We'll be back with more of the 1995 season in just a moment. We've nearly come to the end to our review of the 1995 Formula One World Driving Championship. Surely a triumphant year for Michael Schumacher, the youngest ever back-to-back World Driving titleist, and a great year for his Benetton team picking up their first Constructors' Championship. But next year, Michael will be in a Ferrari, many of the top drivers will be with different teams, and much more will change, Derek. Adelaide, Australia, winner of the best race each year in the eyes of the team owners, will be off the schedule. The best TV show, RTL from Germany, may be off the air as Formula One brings itself into your living rooms in its own format.
And you mentioned changes. There are some subtle changes because next year the numbering system for the cars is all changed. Next year they will carry the finishing position of the Constructors' Championship they achieved in '95. That's something very new.
And for fans of Tyrrell who are used to seeing them carry number 3 and 4, won't be the case next year. The 1996 schedule is still under debate with a few open dates that may be confirmed by Christmas time. We certainly hope so. And there may be some new teams down the road bringing more excitement to the series.
And could we see a resurgence of McLaren? David Brown from Williams has moved over to join Steve Nichols, two of the top race engineers in the business. That could help them. Will we see BMW? I think eventually we will. And it's also possible that Goodyear will have a challenge from Michelin down the road.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. Now let's go to Estoril, Portugal, and get the final thoughts of James Allen.
There's little doubt that the Williams Renault was the best car at the end of the 1995 season, and therefore, on paper at least, Damon Hill must start next year as the championship favourite, particularly as Michael Schumacher and Ferrari say they need time to develop the V10 engine. Don't discount Jean Alesi and Gerhard Berger, however. After all, Benetton did win 11 races in 1995. And then, of course, there's always McLaren and Jordan knocking on the door. But judging by the performances here at Estoril, it's going to be very tight at the top in 1996.
All right, thank you, James. Let's take a look at the final 1995 driving championship points. Michael Schumacher right up top, Damon Hill in second place, a bitter disappointment for him, but he will be back next year, and you can be sure he will be in a potent Williams Renault, although he will have competition from perhaps the most exciting new entry in Formula One in many years, 1995 PPG IndyCar World Champion Jacques Villeneuve of Canada, and that will make the Canadian Grand Prix a very exciting occasion indeed. In the Constructors' Championship, Ferrari, by virtue of having the Drivers' Champion Schumacher in its ranks next year, will number its cars 1 and 2. Followed, in order of finish in the Constructors' Championship, Benetton will have 3 and 4, Williams 5 and 6, and so on. Let's take a look at the 1996 schedule. It all begins March 10th in Melbourne, Australia, on a brand new circuit built in Albert Park that looks very fast and very exciting. We will continue with just 16 races in 1996. And as you take a look down through the list, unfortunately, you will not find a site for the U.S. Formula One Grand Prix, although fans from coast to coast would surely like to see that happen, and no one more so than those of us here at ESPN.